The apartment was quieter than usual, almost unnaturally so. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed faint, as if the entire building had conspired to leave her alone with her thoughts. Maya sat curled on the couch, her phone resting in her hand, screen glowing with the empty silence of unanswered messages. She checked the time again. 11:42 p.m. Daniel had promised he'd be back by 9. 2 hours late. 2 hours of refreshing the screen, staring at the thread of messages that read only her voice. "Where are you? Are you okay? Please call me back." Her thumb hovered, wanting to type again, wanting to beg, but she swallowed it back. She wasn't going to be that girlfriend, the needy, obsessive one. But her chest felt tight, each second dragging like a chain across the floor. Maya rose slowly, pacing the living room. The lights were dim, just a single lamp casting an amber glow over scattered books and an empty glass of wine. The shadows stretched long across the walls, shapes that twisted and moved when she glanced too quickly. It was the kind of silence that made even the smallest creak sound like a warning. She whispered to herself, "He's probably just busy. Maybe with friends. Maybe his phone died." But the words felt hollow. Daniel always texted. Always. A memory rushed in uninvited. The way he'd laughed last week at a message on his phone, quickly tilting the screen away. She had asked who it was, and he had brushed it off. Just a co-worker. But the grin, the kind that lingers longer than it should, had carved itself into her mind. Her phone buzzed suddenly, and her heart leapt. But it wasn't Daniel. Just a meaningless notification. The disappointment cut deeper than silence. Maya let out a sharp breath, almost a laugh, but it trembled at the edges. "God, what am I doing?" she muttered. "I'm sitting here like a fool." The apartment pressed in closer. Every tick of the wall clock seemed to mock her. She picked up her phone again, calling this time. The ringtone stretched out endlessly, then clicked to voicemail. "Hey, it's Daniel. Leave a message." She slammed the call shut before it finished. Anger prickled under her skin, hot and consuming. "Why can't you just answer me?" she whispered, pacing faster now. In the kitchen, she poured herself water, but her hands shook so badly the glass rattled against the counter. She forced herself to drink, the cold liquid sharp in her throat. But it didn't calm her. Nothing did. Her mind spun with images she couldn't control. Daniel laughing with someone else, Daniel's hand brushing against another woman's, Daniel choosing to be anywhere but here with her. The more she pushed the thoughts away, the stronger they returned, like a tide she couldn't fight. She returned to the couch, clutching a pillow against her chest as if it could steady her heartbeat. The street outside was still, the occasional hum of a car passing by. She thought of stepping out, of walking until her legs gave in, but she couldn't bear to miss him if he came back. Finally, she whispered into the empty room, "Just come home. Please, just come home." Her voice cracked. The phone remained silent. Then faintly, she thought she heard something. Laughter. It carried through the night air, distant but sharp, like it didn't belong to this hour. Maya froze, her body rigid, ears straining to catch it again. Silence. Then another sound, low, muffled, but there. Her pulse raced, her breath shallow. She set the phone down, moving toward the window. Outside, shadows shifted along the sidewalk. 2 figures, a man's shape, familiar, a woman beside him, her laughter slicing through Maya's chest. Her hands gripped the curtain tighter, her nails digging into the fabric. Her throat tightened, the jealousy rising like fire for the first time tonight. The silence broke. Not with a message, not with a call, but with the truth she had feared most. And just like that, the night turned darker. The laughter returned, faint but distinct this time, drifting like smoke through the cracks of the night. Maya pressed herself closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass, Her heart hammered against her ribs, each thud echoing in her ears like a drumbeat leading her towards something she didn't want to see but couldn't turn away from. Two silhouettes walked side by side along the street below. The street lamp caught Daniel's profile just enough for her to know. The slope of his shoulders, the way he moved his hands when he talked. It was him. There was no mistaking it. And beside him was a woman. Shorter, slender, hair glinting under the yellow streetlight. She leaned toward him as she laughed, a sound that cut through Maya sharper than glass. It wasn't just laughter, it was intimacy. Her throat tightened, as if invisible fingers pressed against it. The phone still rested on the couch behind her, screen glowing faintly with unanswered calls, proof of his silence. But here he was, alive and well, choosing someone else. Daniel. The name slipped from her lips like a prayer, like a curse. Maya's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Her mind swarmed with questions. Who is she? How long? Has it been happening right under my nose? She replayed every moment, every odd smile, every late night he claimed to be working late. The puzzle pieces rearranged themselves into something monstrous. A shadow of rage stirred deep in her chest, pulsing like a second heartbeat. She wanted to scream out the window, to shatter the night with her fury, but her body stayed frozen. Watching was a torment she couldn't stop. The woman leaned into Daniel, whispering something close to his ear. He laughed, that familiar, warm laugh that used to belong only to her. Maya's nails scraped against the curtain as she whispered through clenched teeth, No, not like this. Not you. The voices outside grew softer, fading as the pair walked farther down the street. For a moment, it was as though the world had stilled again. But the silence this time wasn't empty. It was filled with poison. Maya stepped back from the window, shaking. Her mind argued with itself in frantic bursts. Maybe it's innocent. Maybe she's just a friend. Maybe you're overreacting. But then another voice, darker, sharper, hissed back. Then why the lies? Why no answers? Why the late nights and the hidden smiles? She stumbled to the couch, clutching the pillow against her chest again. The fabric muffled her sob as she finally let the tears spill. But crying didn't wash away the images. They clung to her. Daniel's laugh, the woman's whisper, their closeness under the streetlight. No, she said aloud, voice trembling but firming with each syllable. I need to know. I need to hear it from him. Tonight. The decision struck like lightning, illuminating everything in its path. She couldn't sit here drowning in doubt. She couldn't wait for lies to cover the truth. If he was betraying her, she had to see it with her own eyes, hear it with her own ears. Her gaze fell to the door. The knob gleamed faintly in the dim light, like it was daring her to turn it. Her legs shook as she stood, but determination steadied her. She grabbed her phone, slipping it into her pocket. Not to call him anymore, but to record if she needed to. The thought burned through her chest. If he's lying, I'll have proof. He can't hide from me. Maya reached for her coat, pulling it tight around her as though armor could shield her from the ache gnawing inside. She glanced once more at the window. The street was empty now, but their shadows lingered in her mind. At the threshold she paused, her hand hovering above the knob. A whisper slipped from her lips, barely audible even to herself. Please, let me be wrong. But the whisper held no conviction. She opened the door. The night air rushed in, cold against her skin, carrying the fading echo of laughter that had started all of this. Maya stepped into the darkness, the seed of rage already taking root, her path set toward the confrontation that waited ahead. The cold night air clung to Maya's skin as she hurried down the narrow street, her footsteps sharp against the pavement. The glow of the street lamps flickered, casting restless shadows that danced along the walls. Ahead, she caught sight of them, Daniel and the woman, walking slowly, as if the night belonged to them. Her chest tightened. Each step forward was powered by fury, by heartbreak, by the image burned into her mind of his laughter that used to be hers alone. She didn't stop to think. She didn't stop to breathe. "Daniel!" Her voice cracked through the night like a whip. The pair froze. Daniel turned first, startled, then stiffened as his eyes met hers. Elena, the woman, shifted uneasily, her smile vanishing, guilt etched plainly across her face. "Maya," Daniel said, his voice caught between confusion and irritation. "What are you doing here?" She stormed closer, fists trembling at her sides. "What am I doing here? You disappear for hours, you ignore my calls, and I find you—" Her eyes flicked to Elena, searing with accusation. "With her." Elena looked down, her lips parting, but no words escaping. Daniel stepped in front of her, protective, defensive. "This isn't what you think," he said, his tone sharp. "You're overreacting." Maya laughed bitterly, though the sound was broken. "Overreacting? I've been sitting in that apartment all night wondering if you were hurt, wondering if you were dead, and you're out here with her. Do you even realize what that does to me?" Daniel exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair, frustration etched deep into his face. "You never trust me. Every time I'm late, every time I don't pick up, you assume the worst. I can't live like this, Maya." The words sliced into her, but she pushed back, with trembling rage. "You can't live like this? Then why are you here with another woman in the middle of the night? Who is she, Daniel? Tell me!" His eyes flickered to Elena for the briefest second, a glance that said everything without words. Maya caught it, and the confirmation burned hotter than fire in her chest. Elena shifted, whispering softly, "Maybe I should go." But Maya snapped toward her, voice sharp, raw. "No. Stay. If you're part of this, you don't get to run away." Elena froze, her hands clutched tightly around her purse strap, her face pale under the lamplight. Daniel's tone hardened. "Stop it, Maya. You're making a scene. This isn't fair to anyone." Her hands shook as she pointed at him. "Fair? Was it fair to lie to me? To string me along while you were sneaking around behind my back?" Her voice broke into a sob, words crumbling. "Do you know what it feels like to sit alone in the dark, waiting for someone who's never coming?" Daniel's jaw clenched. He stepped forward, lowering his voice but filling it with steel. "You need to calm down." "Don't you dare tell me to calm down!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the buildings. Tears blurred her vision, but her fury was clearer than ever. The street was still, except for their voices. A stray cat darted into the shadows, spooked by the tension. The night seemed to hold its breath. Elena spoke finally, her voice small. "I didn't mean for this." "Then why are you here?" Maya snapped, cutting her off. "Why are you laughing with my boyfriend in the middle of the night?" Daniel turned on Elena sharply. "Don't answer that." His words were cold, commanding, as if shielding her from the storm. Maya's lip quivered. "So it's true, then?" Daniel sighed, his frustration spilling into anger. "This isn't the place to talk about this." Her voice fell to a whisper, shaky but filled with pain. "Then when is—" "The right time, Daniel. When you've destroyed me completely. When I'm nothing but a memory to you." Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Daniel rubbed his temples, muttering, "God, I can't do this right now." Something inside Maya cracked. The exhaustion of waiting, the sting of betrayal, the humiliation of standing before them. It all fused into a single storm inside her chest. She stepped back, her body trembling uncontrollably. "You've made your choice," she said, her tone hollow, defeated, yet edged with something darker. Her eyes burned into his, then flicked once more to Eleanor. "Both of you." She turned sharply, retreating toward the apartment, her footsteps uneven but quick. Behind her, Daniel called her name once, but she didn't stop. Eleanor stayed silent, clutching her purse like a shield. Maya's mind buzzed with fragments of words, with the image of his protective stance before Elena, with the sound of laughter that no longer belonged to her. By the time she reached the apartment door, the rage had fully taken root. She shut the door behind her with a slam that echoed through the empty room. The shadows welcomed her again, but they no longer felt like companions. They felt like conspirators, feeding the storm inside. Maya collapsed onto the couch, chest heaving, mind spinning. Her hands curled into fists. The silence that had once been unbearable now pressed against her like a weight she couldn't escape. And somewhere in that silence, a dangerous thought whispered, she couldn't let this go. Not tonight. The apartment door slammed behind Maya, the echo vibrating through the narrow hallway like an accusation hurled back at her. Her chest still heaved from the confrontation outside, the words and half-truths replaying in a relentless loop. She pressed her back against the door, trying to block out the muffled sound of footsteps fading down the street. But even in the stillness, Elena's laugh echoed in her head, sharp and mocking, slicing deeper than any insult Daniel had thrown. Maya stumbled it into the living room, her hands shaking as she pressed her palms to her temples. The room seemed smaller than before, the shadows thicker, the silence almost unbearable. She replayed Daniel's tone, frustrated, defensive, dismissive, as if her feelings were a nuisance, something to be brushed aside. And Elena, with her quiet, guilt-ridden face, hadn't even needed to speak. Her presence had been enough to ignite Maya's fury. Pacing back and forth, Maya felt her breathing grow ragged. She tried to reason with herself, tried to find a thread of calm, but it slipped through her trembling fingers. Instead, 1,000 questions screamed inside her skull. Why had Daniel lied? Why had he walked with Eleanor so late, their laughter spilling into the night as if no one else mattered? And why had she, Maya, been left behind in this suffocating silence? Her eyes darted to the window. The street below was empty now, but she could still picture them there. Daniel's profile lit by the dim street lamp. Eleanor's head tilting toward him as though they shared some secret too delicate to say aloud. Maya's stomach twisted. She clenched her fist so tightly her nails pressed into her palms, tiny crescents of pain that still weren't enough to drown the jealousy burning in her veins. She drifted into the kitchen as if pulled by an invisible current. The counter was cluttered, unwashed glasses, half-empty bottles, remnants of last night's dinner she hadn't had the energy to clean. Her gaze snagged on the sink. Among the dishes lay a broken wine bottle, jagged edges catching the light. It had shattered days ago, during another argument when she'd slammed it down too hard. She'd meant to throw it out, but somehow it had lingered, a silent reminder of tempers frayed and patience lost. Maya picked it up carefully, her fingers trembling as they brushed the dangerous rim. She lifted it, staring at her reflex, in the fragment of glass still intact. The woman who looked back at her was almost unrecognizable. Eyes wide, pupils dark, cheeks flushed with a feverish heat. The reflection wasn't calm, wasn't rational. It was raw, broken, and burning with something close to hatred. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "I need answers." The broken bottle felt heavy in her hand, far heavier than glass should. It wasn't just an object now. It was a thought, a possibility, a release. She turned it slowly, watching how the jagged edge caught the faint kitchen light, throwing back distorted glimmers across the walls. Her breath came quicker, shallow gasps that filled the silence. Images of Daniel and Elena swarmed her mind, merging into one cruel picture. His lips close to her ear, her laugh spilling out like music only they could hear. Maya pressed the bottle tighter against her palm, the sharp edge biting into her skin. She wanted the noise in her head to stop, the twisting ache in her chest to end. She stumbled back into the living room, clutching the bottle like a lifeline. Her reflection followed her in the darkened window, the city lights outside framing her silhouette. "He can't do this to me," she muttered, her voice low, desperate. "Not after everything. Not like this." The apartment seemed to tilt around her, every corner whispering doubts, every shadow breathing accusations. The air felt too thick, her lungs straining with each breath. She sat on the edge of the couch, staring down at the jagged weapon in her hand. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, syncing with the rhythm of her spiraling thoughts. Memories of Daniel's laughter, once sweet, now twisted into betrayal. Elena's silent presence loomed larger, an intruder who had stolen what belonged to Maya. The jealousy was no longer just an emotion. It was a living thing, coiled tight inside her chest, suffocating and relentless. Maya's grip on the bottle tightened until her knuckles whitened. She couldn't let it end like this, with Daniel's dismissive tone and Elena's guilty smile. No, there had to be something more, some way to take back control. As she rose to her feet, her shadow stretched long across the floor, merging with the darkness around her. The jagged edge glinted once more, catching the faintest thread of light, as if marking the moment where choice and consequence blurred into one. Maya exhaled slowly, her decision hardening in the silence. She wasn't just a woman scorned. She was someone on the edge of something irreversible. And as the night deepened around her, one thought pulsed louder than her heartbeat. Tonight would not end in silence. The apartment was a storm without sound, its silence charged with Maya's ragged breaths and the sharp glint of the bottle in her hand. She had been pacing for what felt like hours, her shadow drifting across the walls like a restless ghost. Every nerve in her body screamed for release, yet she was suspended in the thick air of anticipation. Then came the knock, firm, familiar. Maya froze, the bottle slipping slightly in her grip before she tightened her fingers again. Another knock, softer this time, followed by Daniel's voice seeping through the door. "Maya, open up, please. Let's talk." Her chest constricted. Just the sound of his voice rekindled everything she had tried to quiet. The jealousy, the betrayal, the image of Elena's head tilted toward him in laughter. She stared at the door as though it were alive, debating whether to answer. But before her thoughts could catch up, her feet carried her forward, unlocking the chain with trembling hands. Daniel stepped inside cautiously, shutting the door behind him. His face was drawn, tired, but his eyes still carried that frustrating calmness that made her feel small. "Maya," he began, voice low, "you're blowing this out of proportion. I wasn't doing anything wrong." The words sliced through her, reigniting the fire in her chest. "Out of proportion?" She spat, her voice cracking. "I saw you, Daniel, with her, laughing like I didn't exist. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" He raised his hands as if to steady the air between them. "Eleanor's just a friend. She needed someone to talk to, that's it." Maya laughed bitterly, the sound brittle and sharp. "A friend? At midnight? Outside my window?" She shook her head, her grip tightening around the jagged glass. "Don't lie to me." His eyes darted to her hand, widening at the sight of the weapon. "Maya, put that down," he said softly, inching closer. "You're scary, and me. You don't want to do this." But his calmness, his attempt at control, only fanned her rage. She backed away a step, the bottle raised slightly, trembling in the dim light. "You don't get to tell me what I want. Not anymore." Daniel's voice hardened. "This isn't you. You're letting jealousy twist everything. I came here because I care about you, because I don't want to lose you. But this," he gestured at the bottle, "this isn't the answer." For a moment, the plea wavered in the air, brushing against Maya's fragile composure. Her eyes stung, tears blurring her vision. "Then why did you look at her like that?" She whispered, Like I wasn't enough. Daniel's jaw tightened, and his silence was louder than any denial. That pause, that hesitation, was all Maya needed to convince herself of the truth she feared most. The argument flared, words spilling fast and hot, voices clashing like thunder. Daniel tried to take the bottle, stepping closer, but Maya jerked back. Their bodies collided near the couch, his hand grasping her wrist, her voice rising into a scream. "Stop lying to me!" In the struggle, her arm swung wildly. The jagged glass caught the light before slashing downward in a swift, blind arc. A sound, half gasp, half groan, escaped Daniel as his body jolted. The world seemed to stop in that instant, the weight of silence crushing everything. The bottle slipped from Maya's hand, shattering further as it hit the floor, scattering shards across the carpet like frozen tears. Daniel staggered, his hand pressing instinctively to his side where crimson began to bloom. His eyes locked on hers, wide with disbelief, as though he couldn't quite comprehend what had happened. "Maya," he breathed, his voice weak, trembling. Maya's own body went numb, her hands hovering uselessly in the air. She hadn't meant, at least not in this way, not like this. The argument still echoed, but now it was distant, drowned by the horrific stillness that followed. Daniel collapsed onto the couch, his breath shallow, the colour draining from his face. Maya dropped to her knees beside him, tears streaking down her cheeks. "No, no, no," she whispered frantically. "This wasn't supposed to happen. I just wanted you to listen. I just wanted you to see me." Her hands fluttered helplessly over the wound, pressing down in a futile attempt to stop the flow. The metallic scent of blood filled the air, thick and suffocating. Daniel winced, his eyes struggling to stay open, his lips parting as though to speak. But no words came. The apartment, once filled with the noise of their argument, now held only the shallow, laboured sound of his breathing. Each second stretched, unbearable, as Maya realized the irreversible line as she had crossed. Her mind raced, call for help, run, confess, but none of the choices felt real. All she could do was stare at the spreading stain on Daniel's shirt, her reflection in the glass shards around them fractured and distorted. For the first time that night, the silence wasn't filled with suspicion or jealousy. It was filled with something heavier, darker, a silence that demanded acknowledgement. As Daniel's body slumped further, his weight sinking into the cushions, Maya's tears blurred her vision until she could no longer see him clearly. The bottle lay broken on the floor, a cruel mirror of what they once were, whole, then shattered in an instant. And in that silence, as the truth of her actions settled like dust in the air, one thought crept into Maya's mind with terrifying clarity. This was only the beginning. The silence after Daniel's collapse was unbearable, thick with the metallic scent of blood and the pounding of Maya's own heart. She knelt beside him, her trembling hands pressed against the spreading wound, whispering words even she could barely hear. "Hold on. Please, Daniel, just hold on." Then came the sound she had forgotten could exist. Another person's breath. Maya's head snapped toward the open doorway, and there stood Eleanor, her face pale and stricken. She had returned to retrieve her forgotten scarf, only to stumble upon the sight that would etch itself forever into her memory. Daniel slumped on the couch, his shirt drenched in red, and Maya crouched before him, shards of glass scattered like evidence across the floor. For a moment, Eleanor could not move, her body locked in place as though the scene had stolen the very will from her limbs. She wanted to scream, but all that left her lips was a small, broken gasp. "Eleanor!" Maya's voice cracked, panicked, her eyes wide. "It's not what it looks like. Please, it was an accident. He tried to grab me and the bottle." She gestured helplessly at the jagged pieces on the ground. "I didn't mean for this to happen." But Elena's gaze remained fixed on Daniel, on the rise and fall of his chest that was growing weaker with each passing second. Tears blurred her vision, hot and relentless. She had known jealousy could wound, but never had she imagined it would spill over into something this real, this irreversible. Maya crawled toward her, her blood-stained hands reaching out, desperate to be understood. "You believe me, don't you? You have to. It was an accident. You know me, Elena. I'm not a monster." The sound of her name spoken in that frantic tone jolted Eleanor from her paralysis. She staggered back, shaking her head. Fear coiled through her veins, cutting through the shock. Instinct whispered that this was no longer about understanding. This was about survival. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything. Then she remembered. The phone in her bag by the door. If she could just reach it, maybe she could save Daniel. Maybe she could save herself. Maya saw the shift in her expression, and panic surged. "No," she pleaded, her voice rising into a ragged scream. "Don't you dare! Don't call anyone! They'll think I did this on purpose." Elena backed away, her steps quick and uneven, her hand fumbling inside her bag until her fingers brushed against the smooth rectangle of her phone. She pulled it out, her thumb trembling as it hovered over the keypad. "Elena, please!" Maya's words were frantic, her tears streaming as she clutched at her hair. "If you call them, they'll take me away. My life will be over. You don't understand. I loved him. I just snapped." The confession hung in the air, raw and jagged. But it didn't stop Elena. Her hands shook as she pressed the numbers, the screen glowing in the dim room. "Put it down!" Maya shouted, lunging forward, but stopped short when Daniel let out a weak, guttural moan. Both women froze, their eyes snapping back to him, his lips parted, a whisper barely escaping. "Help! Me!" The fragile plea broke whatever hesitation remained in Elena. Her thumb pressed firmly, dialing the only number that mattered. She lifted the phone to her ear, her voice trembling but urgent as she spoke into the void. "Hello? Please, we need an ambulance. There's been a stabbing. He's bleeding out. Hurry." Her words cracked under the weight of truth, and as she gave the address, her tears fell harder, smudging her vision. Maya sank against the wall, her body folding into itself. She rocked back and forth, whispering apologies no one could absorb. Her mind replayed the downward slash, the sound of glass on flesh, over and over again until it felt branded into her very soul. Elena's voice was steadying now, fueled not by calm, but by necessity. She answered the dispatcher's questions, her eyes darting between Daniel's fading form and Maya's unravelling one. Each second felt like an eternity, yet each second dragged them closer to consequences none of them could outrun. The call ended, but the silence that followed was no relief. Both women remained trapped in their own spirals, Maya drowning in guilt, Eleanor bracing herself for the arrival of flashing lights and sirens. Somewhere in the distance, faint but growing, the wail of an ambulance began to cut through the night. Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. This was the moment everything would change, the line between secrecy and truth about to be obliterated by the force of reality. Maya's eyes lifted, wild and broken. "You've doomed me," she whispered. "You don't know what you've done." But Elena couldn't respond. She could only watch the door, waiting for the inevitable, praying that Daniel would survive long enough to see it. The sound came first, high-pitched, rising and falling, cutting through the thick silence like a blade. Sirens. Growing closer, faster. Their wail bounced off the apartment walls, vibrating inside Maya's chest, until she could no longer tell whether the pounding she felt was her heart or the world crashing in around her. Flashes of red and blue spilled through the window blinds, staining the dimly lit room in waves of colour. Daniel's shallow breaths rattled from the couch, each one thinner than the last. Eleanor stood frozen near the door, clutching her phone as if it were a lifeline. Maya sat crumpled on the floor, her back pressed against the wall, her hands slick and crimson. The front door burst open. Uniformed officers rushed in first, weapons raised until their eyes fell on the scene. Behind them, paramedics pushed through with bags and stretchers, their movements quick and precise. The sudden chaos filled every corner. Orders barked. Radios crackling, the rustle of gloves being snapped on. Maya blinked at the flood of bodies. Her voice cracked, raw. "It was an accident. I didn't mean for this to happen." An officer crouched near her, keeping his distance but making his voice firm. "Ma'am, stay where you are. Don't move. Keep your hands where we can see them." Maya lifted her trembling palms, streaked with blood that had already begun to dry at the edges. The sight made her stomach churn. She wanted to scream that she wasn't dangerous, that this wasn't who she was, but the words tangled in her throat, coming out as choked sobs. 2 paramedics worked swiftly over Daniel, cutting his shirt open, pressing gauze against the wound, calling numbers and vitals Maya didn't understand. She strained to hear his voice, to catch even the faintest sound, but his eyes were closed now, his chest rising only in shallow jerks under their hands. Is he going to be okay?" Maya begged, her voice cracking with desperation. No one answered her. Elena, still pale, stepped forward when an officer gestured to her. Her voice shook, but her words carried weight, each syllable like a nail being driven in. I saw it happen. She had the bottle. She cut him. Daniel tried to stop her, but..." She broke off, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Maya snapped her head toward her. "That's not true. I didn't mean to. Elena, you know it wasn't like that. It was an accident." But Elena's eyes refused to meet hers. The statement was already lodged in the air, unchangeable. The officers scribbled it down, one nodding grimly. "Stand up, ma'am," another officer ordered Maya. Her body felt like stone, but she forced herself upright, her legs wobbling beneath her. Cold metal touched her wrists, snapping shut with a finality that made her stomach drop. The handcuffs bit into her skin, and for the first time she felt the weight of what she had done. An anchor, dragging her deeper into an ocean she could no longer swim in. As the officers guided her toward the door, Maya looked back. The paramedics were lifting Daniel onto a stretcher, tubes and wires tethered to his fragile body. His face was ghostly pale, his chest still struggling against the tide. She wanted to run to him, to scream his name, but her arms were pinned behind her, her freedom slipping further with each step. Elena stood against the wall, watching everything unfold, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked like a child lost in a nightmare, yet her words had already sealed the roles: victim, witness, perpetrator. Outside, the night was alive with chaos. Patrol cars lined the street, their sirens muted now, but their lights spinning relentlessly, washing the world in flashing red and blue. Curious neighbors had gathered on sidewalks, whispering, pointing, their faces lit by the macabre glow. Maya felt their eyes on her, each gaze a silent judgment, a verdict before the trial even began. The officers led her down the steps, her bare feet cold against the pavement. Her tears blurred the swarm of lights, until everything melted into streaks of color. She whispered, barely audible, "I loved him. I didn't mean to." But no one listened. Her words were swallowed by the hum of radios, the shouts of orders, the slamming of doors. As Maya was guided into the back of a patrol car, she caught one last glimpse of Daniel's stretcher being loaded into the ambulance. The doors slammed shut, and the siren wailed again, carrying him into the night. Whether toward life or death, she could no longer tell. The cruiser door shut beside her with a heavy click. She sat in the darkness, her reflection faint in the glass, the distant red and blue lights washing over her face in rhythmic pulses. Her body shook with sobs, yet her mind felt eerily clear. This was the point of no return. And as the car pulled away, leaving the flashing chaos behind, Maya knew that the night's silence, the one that had begun with unanswered calls, was gone forever. Ahead lay only interrogation rooms, courtroom walls, and the weight of Elena's trembling words hanging over her like a noose. Months bled into each other like spilled ink. Time marked not by sunlight or seasons, but by court dates, hearings, and the relentless march toward judgment. For Maya, the world shrank to a cold cell and the occasional glimpse of daylight through barred windows. The silence of her apartment had been replaced with a different silence, the suffocating quiet of guilt, punctuated only by the clang of doors and the whispers of other inmates. Now, she stood in the center of a new stage, the courtroom. The air was heavy, thick with tension and the faint musk of old wood. Rows of strangers sat in the gallery, their faces a blur of curiosity and condemnation. Journalists hunched over notepads, pens scratching furiously, ready to turn her tragedy into tomorrow's headline. Maya's wrists were free for the first time in months, but the invisible weight of chains remained. She sat at the defense table, her lawyer murmuring reassurances that barely reached her ears. Across the room, Elena sat stiff-backed, her pale face framed by grief. Each time their eyes nearly met, Maya looked away, her stomach knotting with dread. The trial began with the prosecutor's voice, sharp and unyielding. He painted a picture of obsession and fury, of a woman consumed by jealousy until reason was lost. His words echoed through the char. But oh, this was not an accident. This was rage, raw, violent, and deadly. Maya clenched her hands in her lap, her nails biting crescents into her palms. She wanted to scream that he was wrong, that she never meant for Daniel to bleed, never meant for her love to transform into something monstrous. But every time she looked at the jury, she saw only guarded eyes, already leaning toward the narrative that had been carefully spun. Witnesses followed, each one adding another layer to the portrait of Maya as the jealous lover undone. Friends of Daniel testified about her insecurities, about the late-night arguments overheard through thin walls, about the accusatory texts she sent when he was late. Each story was a needle, stitching together a pattern that Maya barely recognized yet could not deny. Her former co-worker took the stand, recalling how Maya once confided in her that she couldn't stand the thought of losing Daniel, that she'd rather die than see him with someone else. The words, once uttered in a moment of vulnerability, now sounded like a confession, replayed in the sterile language of testimony. Then came Elena. The courtroom fell into a hush as she stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she took the oath. Her voice was soft but steady, carrying the weight of both truth and survival. She described the night in halting detail, the laughter outside the apartment, the confrontation, the bottle in Maya's hand. She was angry, Elena whispered, her eyes glistening. I tried to stay out of it, but then I saw her. I saw the way she looked at Daniel. And when it happened, when the bottle came down, her voice broke and she paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. It wasn't an accident, not the way she moved. It was like all the jealousy, all the anger just exploded in that moment. The prosecutor let the silence stretch before thanking her. Every word hung in the air, damning and unshakable. Maya wanted to rise, to shout that Elena was twisting it, that she wasn't inside her mind, that no one could cow. Now the confusion, the storm that had raged inside her. But her lawyer placed a steadying hand on her arm, urging restraint. Finally, it was Maya's turn. She stood, her knees weak, her throat dry as she faced the jury. Her lawyer's questions were gentle, guiding her to tell her side. She spoke of love, of fear, of the loneliness that had eaten at her that night. Tears streamed down her face as she recounted the moment, her voice breaking with sincerity. I didn't want to hurt him, she cried. I loved Daniel more than anything. I was scared, jealous, yes, but I never wanted this. It happened so fast. One moment we were fighting, the next, he was bleeding. Please, you have to believe me. I never meant to kill him. The courtroom remained silent. Her words fluttered into the stillness, but failed to land. In the jury's eyes, she saw not compassion, but caution, the reflection of rage rather than love. The prosecutor's cross-examination was merciless. "You say you didn't mean it, Ms. Reyes. But didn't you grab the bottle? Didn't you raise it? Didn't you strike downward with enough force to leave a fatal wound?" Maya's tears blurred her vision. I didn't think. I wasn't myself." "No," the prosecutor snapped. "You were exactly yourself, jealous, enraged, determined to punish him for loving someone else." The words reverberated in Maya's chest like blows. She wanted to scream, but her voice failed her. The jury's expressions were unreadable, stone masks that offered no mercy. As closing arguments approached, the atmosphere grew heavier. The prosecutor spoke of betrayal, of obsession turned lethal, of the need for justice for Daniel. The defense countered with appeals to humanity, to understanding the complexity of love and fear, but their words felt drowned beneath the tide. When the jury left to deliberate, Maya sat alone at the table, her hands clasped together, her lightin pus moving in silent prayer. She thought of Daniel, not the man bleeding on the couch, but the boy who had once brushed her hair back with tender fingers, who whispered promises of forever. His absence filled the courtroom, a ghostly presence more powerful than any witness. Hours passed like years. The jury returned, their expressions grave. As the foreperson rose, Maya's heart thudded in her ears. "We, the jury, find the defendant." The words that followed shattered her world. Her knees buckled, her lawyer steadying her as tears blurred the faces around her. Gasps rippled through the gallery, and Eleanor buried her face in her hands. Maya's sobs echoed through the chamber, raw and broken, but to the jury, they sounded less like grief and more like guilt. The gavel struck, sealing her fate. Months blurred into one another, measured not by seasons but by hearings, lawyer visits, and the heavy tick of clocks inside a grey cell. For Maya, life was reduced to cold walls, whispered rumours from other inmates, and the constant ache of waiting. Outside, the world moved on without her. But inside, time slowed into something unbearable. At last, the day arrived. The trial. The courthouse loomed like an ancient monument, its marble pillars catching the pale winter sun. Crowds gathered on the steps, journalists with cameras, curious onlookers, and those who had come to see justice, or perhaps tragedy, unfold. To Maya, it felt like walking into a theatre where she was both the villain and the spectacle. Inside, the courtroom was heavy with silence. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of bodies, and the stale scent of dust and varnish lingered in the air. Maya sat at the defense table beside her lawyer, wrists free, but spirit shackled. She could feel eyes pressing against her from every direction, accusing, dissecting, judging. Across the aisle sat Eleanor. Her hair, once flowing and carefree, was tied back in a neat braid, her clothes sombre. She looked fragile yet unbroken, as though sorrow had carved her into something sharp. Maya dared not hold her gaze for long. Evie, every time their eyes nearly met, guilt pressed harder against her chest. And then there was Daniel, absent, yet present in every breath, every pause, every memory replayed. His name echoed through whispered conversations, his image lingered in the photographs presented as evidence, and his ghost filled the room like a shadow no light could chase away. The prosecutor opened with a voice like steel. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about passion alone. It is about obsession, an obsession so consuming it turned into violence. The defendant, Maya Reyes, could not bear the thought of losing Daniel, and in her rage, she made sure no one else could have him either." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Maya sat rigid, her pulse drumming in her ears. She wanted to shout, "No, that's not who I am. That's not what happened." But her lawyer's hand squeezed her wrist gently, reminding her to wait. The witnesses began. One after another, friends and acquaintances filed in. Each face carried fragments of her life, now sharpened into weapons. Daniel's co-worker spoke of overhearing late-night arguments, voices raised in anger. A neighbor described seeing Maya waiting outside Daniel's apartment, eyes red, fists clenched. Another recalled a time Maya had admitted, half joking, half serious, "I'd rather die than see him with someone else." Each testimony was a chisel, carving deeper into the picture of Maya as a woman unhinged. She listened in silence, her heart breaking as pieces of her private world were laid bare, distorted and magnified until they became something monstrous. Then came Eleanor. The room seemed to hold its breath as she stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the Bible, but her voice was steady when she began. She described the night, how laughter had turned to shouting, how Maya had confronted Daniel, how jealousy hung thick in the air.
"God, I saw her eyes," Elena whispered, tears gathering at the corners. "It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper. Something that wanted to destroy."
Her words hung like smoke, impossible to dispel. The prosecutor let the silence linger before thanking her, the effect sinking in. Maya wanted to cry out, "No, you don't understand. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I loved him." But she bit her tongue, her body trembling with restraint. Finally, it was her turn. She rose, the weight of 1,000 stares pressing down on her. Her lawyer guided her gently through questions, giving her space to tell her story. Her voice wavered, but grew stronger as she spoke. "I loved Daniel," she began, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, I was jealous. I was scared of losing him. But that night, it wasn't supposed to end like this. I didn't plan it. I didn't mean for him to—" Her words faltered. "He was my world. I never wanted to hurt him." Her tears fell freely now, but the jury's faces remained unmoved, masks of caution and suspicion. The prosecutor rose for cross-examination, his words precise, cutting. "You say you didn't mean to harm him. But you picked up the bottle, didn't you? You raised it. You struck him." Maya's voice cracked. I wasn't thinking. It was the heat of the moment. I lost control." "Exactly," he pressed. "You lost control because your jealousy controlled you. That is not love, Ms. Reyes. That is rage." The words sliced through her, leaving her trembling, speechless. The silence afterward felt like a verdict already passed. When closing arguments came, the prosecutor painted her as the embodiment of dangerous obsession. "This was not a tragic accident," he declared. "This was murder, born of jealousy and fueled by rage." Her lawyer countered with appeals to compassion, to the complexity of human hearts, to the possibility of an accident in a storm of emotions. But his words felt thin against the heavy tide. The jury left to deliberate, leaving Maya in a purgatory of waiting. She sat hunched at the defense, table, lips moving in a silent prayer. She thought of Daniel, his laughter, the way his hand once fit perfectly into hers, the warmth of his voice calling her name. He was everywhere and nowhere, haunting her with what could never be undone. Hours passed like lifetimes before the jury returned. The foreperson stood, paper trembling slightly in their grasp. Maya's breath caught in her throat. "We, the jury, find the defendant." The words that followed shattered the last fragile thread of her world. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Elena buried her face in her hands. Maya's knees buckled, her lawyer holding her upright as sobs tore from her chest. The gavel struck like a hammer, sealing her fate. Her tears filled the silence, but to those watching, they sounded less like grief and more like guilt. And as she was led away, the weight of the next chapter of her life, punishment, exile, and the endless echo of Daniel's absence, loomed ahead, waiting like a door about to close. The gavel's echo had not faded when Maya's world finally collapsed. The words guilty rang inside her skull like a bell that would never stop tolling. As officers gripped her arms and led her away, she caught one last glimpse of Elena weeping into her hands. It was not triumph on Elena's face, not even relief. It was something heavier, grief mixed with guilt. That look followed Maya long after the courtroom doors slammed shut behind her. The transfer to prison blurred into a haze of metal bars, whispered orders, and the sound of keys turning in locks. She was processed, stripped of her clothes, her jewelry, even her name. From that day forward, she was not Maya Reyes, the woman who once loved and dreamed. She was only a number stitched onto a uniform. Her cell was a narrow box with peeling paint, a single bed, and a toilet in the corner. The first night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the trial in fragments. The prosecutor's voice, Elena's trembling testimony, the jury's cold stares, and always Daniel's face, flickering like a ghost just out of reach. She whispered his name into the darkness, as if he might answer. But only silence came. Days became weeks, and weeks blurred into months. Time inside was strange. It crawled and sprinted in equal measure. Mornings began with the clanging of doors, the shuffle of bodies lining up for breakfast, the heavy footsteps of guards. Afternoons were a dull routine of work assignments or endless hours staring at concrete walls. At night, the prison hummed with muffled cries, angry whispers, and the restless breathing of those who carried their own sins. Maya became one of them. She tried to keep to herself, but stories traveled quickly inside. Others had heard the details, how jealousy drove her to strike, how love curdled into murder. Some inmates looked at her with disdain, others with pity. A few, the ones who had light, veered through their own violent storms, offered a kind of quiet understanding. Yet none of it eased the weight she carried. Her guilt was her truest cellmate. She replayed the night again and again, the laughter outside her window, the confrontation, the bottle glinting in her hand. Daniel's voice, sharp and distant, the moment of impact, the sickening sound that still woke her in cold sweats. She told herself it was an accident, but the truth gnawed at her. It was her hand that struck, her rage that blinded, her jealousy that destroyed. Meanwhile, outside those walls, Elena carried her own burden. Though the court had accepted her testimony, victory felt hollow. Each night she woke to the memory of Daniel collapsing, the blood spreading beneath him. She remembered Maya's eyes, wide with terror and fury. She remembered the helplessness of standing frozen, unable to stop the moment from unfolding. Eleanor tried to return to her old life, but everything was stained by that night. Friends offered comfort, yet behind their sympathy lingered judgment, questions whispered but never asked. Why had she been there with Daniel? Why had she not left sooner? Some saw her as the victim, others as the reason the tragedy happened at all. Her guilt festered in silence. She often found herself walking aimlessly through the city streets, drifting past places Daniel once loved, the cafe where he sketched in notebooks, the bookstore he frequented, the park bench where he once told her he felt free. Every memory cut like glass. Sometimes she thought she saw him in passing strangers, but the illusion always vanished, leaving only emptiness. One evening, Eleanor sat by her window, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. She whispered his name the way Maya once did, as though the night might return him. But it never did. Inside prison, Maya's reflections turned darker. She kept a small journal, scribbling words late into the night when sleep would not come. She wrote to Daniel as if he could read them. Apologies. Confessions. Fragments of love letters. Sometimes she addressed Elena, begging her forgiveness, though she doubted those words would ever reach her. Other times, she simply wrote about shadows, the ones on her cell wall, the ones inside her heart. Her lawyer visited occasionally, speaking of appeals, but Maya barely listened. Legal battles no longer mattered. Freedom felt distant, almost irrelevant. She knew even if the walls opened tomorrow, she would never be free of what she had done. Seasons shifted beyond the barred windows. Summer heat seeped through the concrete, then winter's chill. Time measured itself in holidays uncelebrated, birthdays forgotten. Letters from her family grew fewer, their voices strained when they did come. Slowly, the world outside let her go, as if she had already vanished. And perhaps she had. Yet the memory of Daniel refused to fade. She remembered the warmth of his laughter, the curve of his smile, the way his hand once steadied hers. These recollections tormented her, but they were also all she had left. In the shadows of her cell, she clung to them, even as they burned her from within. Elena, too, lived in shadows. She avoided relationships, afraid of the scars she carried, afraid of repeating the past. Whenever someone tried to get close, she pulled away, haunted by the image of Daniel's final moments. Love, once sweet, had become tainted by memory, by guilt, by the fear of destruction. For both women, the night of Daniel's death had become an anchor, dragging them into depths they could never escape. One imprisoned by walls and bars, the other by conscience and loss. The story did not end with justice, not truly. The court had delivered its verdict, but no sentence could undo what jealousy had shattered. Daniel was gone, and with him went the possibility of forgiveness, of repair, of peace. Love, twisted into something desperate and consuming, had destroyed them all. Maya sat alone in her cell one evening, the setting sun bleeding orange light through the small barred window. She held her journal open, pen hovering above the page. She wanted to write something different, something that might release her from the cycle of guilt. Instead, she scrawled a single line. Love should save us. Why did mine destroy everything? She closed the notebook and pressed it to her chest, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Outside, the prison lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the yard. And somewhere in the city, Eleanor lay awake in her own bed, staring at the ceiling, whispering the same unanswered question. The world had moved on, but for them, time had stopped. Both lived in shadows, bound forever to a night that could never be undone.